It's hot over here, Vicky.
Right here.
Can you hear me, Vicky?
Good morning. I can hear you now.
Okay, good. Whew, it's hot.
You hot?
It's so hot over here.
It feels good to me. It's cold over here.
It's hot. And
Oh
when I
my
close
goodness.
that door, it's like, all right, let me start letting people in. Fred, you can man the break room and the questions like you did on Friday. You can be all in for Fred.
I was on the phone and Kathy called me and then I got off the, here it is.
Good morning, everyone. We'll give 3 minutes for those who might just be joining on.
Mhm.
Are they letting you in?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess I'll be on there as soon as I can find it.
Okay. All right. Thank you,
All
ma'am.
right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Good morning, grantees. I hope you all love it. People always say Mississippi weather is different, and this week I feel it because I think it was supposed to snow last week, and now this week it's 80 degrees and hot. So we'll just try to stay cool in this hot flash of winter months.
I didn't bring up no check this year. Yeah, that's gonna give that to us twice a year. They're doing the same thing.
Cindy, I'm gonna put you on. Will you call or text Regina? She's got a real phone now.
All right, it's 3 minutes past, and I want to get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Federal Grants Office Hours for our new year 2025. As you know, the office hours was meant for the last Thursday, in January, but we had a lot of different things going on in January. So now we're going to start the month off fresh in February with some critical information. Now, because our office hours in January was postponed to today, it doesn't mean we will not do one again at the end of the month. We will be having another office hours at the end of the month, last Thursday in February, and we will go over home ARP reporting. So expect that to be sent out to y'all by the 14th of February. But just so you can know, today's office hours is not to replace February office hours. It is January office hours that was just postponed due to all the things that was going on during that time. With that being said, welcome to our office hours. I love this time because we can go in and look at some ways we can improve systems and also hear back from you all on suggestions or things that's working or not working in the field, or just questions. In this office hours, we will look a little bit into some federal regulations changes, but this is going to go over applying good budgets and keeping your budgets. And we have a few people still joining in. Fred, do you mind, as I said, working the people as they come in and muting all mics as needed? Let's get started. Didn't share my screen. Let me start there. Creating and maintaining a sound grant budget. Attendees of the Federal Grant Office Hours session will receive valuable information to enhance their management of federal grant programs and improve program outcomes. This session will provide subgrantees with tips for creating and managing federal grants budgets, federal requirements, and administration of grants. The target audience is, of course, funders, fundees, their staff, their fiscal officers, and some case managers that feel needed. We're going to first go over good financial management systems. The good financial management system section I'll go over is actually provided by HUD, but good financial management systems, one, it promotes integrity, transparency, and accountability. It also helps with plans, monitor and document all transactions. It adheres to our regulations. And the list of regulations, of course, is CFR 200, 24 CFR 576, which is ESG, 24 CFR 578, which is HOPWA, CPT Notice 2021-10, which is Home ARP. And it helps strengthen programs. Specific standards for good financial management systems are outlined in the Code of Financial Regulations. If you don't know what your code, our codes are, it is going to be the OMB circular, also which is the CFR 200. HUD financial management adhere to core principles, which is required by all HUD financial funded programs. We have to follow our cost principles, 2 CFR 200, help to have internal controls, and also a procurement budgeting process. And I want to stop right here because I think I forgot to press record. I sure did. No,
I think it started recording automatically.
Oh, that's good. Well, I'm going to come back in there.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next sections I'll go over cost principles, internal controls, procurement, and budgeting, methods of budgeting. When we get into the budgeting, that's when we're going to get into the weeds of how you can help budget your programs and actually maintain certain budgets. 2 CFR cost principle, 2 CFR 200, also known as the OMB circular. It was updated in October 2024. I honestly, you don't have to read the entire document, but look up the changes. Some of the changes we will identify in this presentation. Eligible costs. So 2 CFR 200 does go into what is considered an eligible cost. So to decide that, you must determine or ask yourself, is the cost allowable by the funding source? Also ask yourself, is the cost reasonable? Is the cost what a prudent person will pay? Is it ordinary cost and is it necessary? Or because it is allowed doesn't mean you should get it if it's not necessary. This is critical, especially if we're looking at spending down our grants. Don't just start drawing down your grants to spend the money if it's not necessary for your program. Can the cost be assigned or allocated to a specific funding source? We also determine that. So number 2 is usually where it takes a lot of discernment, not only from your side on how you should do things, but also from our side and also the federal government. So they do look at, is it reasonable? Is it something that a prudent person will do, and is it necessary? And if they can, and they try to find ways to determine if that's true. And if they determine that it's not true, then they can cite you with a finding. The other two, number 1 and number 3, can be listed to specific costs. 2 CFR 200 defines what is allowable, reasonable, and allocable expense. Budgeting. When you're looking at your budget, you must consider also remember that it is a federal grant requirement. You're not just throwing a budget together as a part of an application, considering that we may not know exactly what's happening with your asking for. It is a federal grant requirement, so we need you to actually put some good effort into making sure that the information provided is as much as you can predict it to be. Budgeting includes planning for both revenue and expenses at the unit cost and also at the project level and program level. Budgeting provides an ongoing check for reasonableness by comparing actual expenses against the project plan. Just throwing in new expenses to get to the end of the grant is not part of budgeting. But I know sometimes, because we don't get exactly what we anticipate, we have to take out what we expect, and that's fine. Budgeting assures funds will be available when it's needed. Budgeting is included in the written agreement. So when you send us your budget, it does be added to your contract, and it promotes accountability. Looking at the budget, we have, but your budget might come in 3 different areas. An organization budget, which goes over the staff, your overhead, and your operation. And after you determine that, you may come down and develop a program budget that takes into account the staff, but also takes into account what you're doing in the community. And under your programs, you might have a homeless housing program that has its own budget. And here's some homeless housing programs I know that you all work with, include the COC, ESG, SSVF, Hawkwood. You might have some shelter programs that have specific budgets as well. So you have to consider how these programs work together in helping you fulfill your budget. You also look at the project level budget. In the ESG, you have to look at the shelter and then specifically rapid rehousing, homeless prevention, street outreach, and HMIF. In SSVF, you have rapid rehousing and homeless prevention, and COC, you have rapid rehousing and permanent support housing. So as an agency, if you have multiple rapid rehousing budgets, then you need to determine how those costs will be shared across all of those programs. When you're budgeting for your project, look at your project activity. And also consider match in programs where match is a requirement, and program income. Program income is a requirement and should be included in your budget. Agencies' RSC, request for cash, must be compared and match their approved budgets before reimbursements can be made. Mississippi Home Corporation cannot reimburse for amounts that exceed or is different than their approved program budget and contract. In other words, if you have on your program budget and contract that you set aside 15,000 for rapid rehousing, but your next RSC says you have 20,000, it doesn't line up, and you all know, we will send that back to you and ask you to do a budget modification. Program income, if this is the new word for you, then please pay attention because program income is a thing for ESG. You also know it's required, it is used in HOCWA. So program income for ESG, what is it exactly? Program income can be the gross income received by the subrecipient. The income that you receive as a subrecipient through the ESG program. It may come in the form of security deposits or utility deposits being returned to the agency. Deposits may be returned by the ESG participant, and or it can be retained if it's not counted as program income. Probably need to reword that a little bit, but as I mentioned, deposits can be retained by the program participant. And if it's not retained, it can be returned and then counted as program income. ESG does not require deposits to be returned. But if it do, and here are some instances where it might be returned to you. For example, you house a family and they decide to leave the property without you knowing, and they left. And the landlord went through the property, it was in good condition, they decided to return to you the deposits. Or maybe the lights got turned off because they relocated and the utility company sent you the deposits. That's considered program income. So what can you use your program income for? You can use it for match. You can use it for payments of any ESG eligible costs. It's used to reduce the grantee's contribution. So if you're using it for match, it will be less match that you have to come out of pocket for. Subgrantees must track all program income for ESG and report all program incomes during the CAPER and monitoring visits. We have not been requiring you to give us this information before. I've just been putting zero when HUD asked me, but it is the reporting element for the CAPER. Each year they ask, how much program income was collected, or was any program income collected by the agency? And we need to start documenting this appropriately if you have it. Even if it's just $250 that came in from Entergy, whatever it is, you must document it. We do not collect it. It's kept by the agency to be used in the program. Program income for HOCWA. Now you'll see more program income coming in from the HOCWA program than the ESG program. So what is program income for HOCWA? It is the gross income received by the subrecipient. It may include deposits and or rent payments. See page 92 of the HOCWA rental guide. Deposits must be returned to the project sponsor. So where ESG had that, it could be, it could not be type of, it's up to the agency type thing. HOCWA tends to lean, it don't require it, but they do lean strongly that deposits are returned to the agency and used as program income. Okay, so if you haven't been collecting that, it needs to be collected for HOCWA. What can it be used for HOCWA? It must be applied to rental programs activities, or it must be applied to housing placement activities. Project sponsors must track all program income for HOCWA and report all program incomes during the CAPER and monitoring visits. And if you haven't had us ask the question before, we will. If you put zero on the CAPER, we need an explanation on why you have a HOCWA program with no program income, because there are several activities where HOCWA requires rent to be paid by the subrecipients. And HUD doesn't look fairly or kindly on just zero. They'll accept that, but they need an explanation. Procurements. With our federal programs, procurement, federal funded agencies must follow the state and federal procurement requirements. Mississippi Home Corporation procurement requirements looks just like the federal government. However, the state of Mississippi as itself may have other procurement policies. So, and you must go with the most conservative rule. Okay, we're not going by the most flexible, the most conservative rule must apply. Procurement must be fair, it must be open and well documented. Procurement may be done through a request for proposals or request for bids. Formal bids is required. The type of procurement process must be fully documented and it must be included inside your policy. So you can't have in your policy that you will be do a request for proposal and then you turn around and just do bids without requesting for a proposal and select the lowest one. Like you have to actually follow your policy, and the policy must line up with the federal government and the state policy says. Procurement must assure market price or best offer. Also, when it comes to procurement, you can't go around procurement. That's a federal finding against the federal regulations. An example of going around procurement may be, you may see that you may have got quoted that to fix the kitchen in your shelter will cost you $75,000. Your kitchen needs to be fixed, so you decided to skip the procurement process and then go ahead and find some local people to do it for the most cheapest rate, and then split each cost. The roof costs $5,000, so you're gonna split that out from the driveway cost in a separate amount. You split those amounts out so the procurement won't be triggered. You can't do that. If the total project cost will trigger the procurement process, then you need to do the procurement process. Do not try to go around the procurement process. Additionally, even if the total process does not require procurement process, does not trigger procurement, just to be sure you're following regulations. If you have something to that's going to cost you a lot of money, still go through a bid process or find the cheapest that you can find to do that activity. It might be renting a moving truck. You should not go and get the most expensive moving truck. You should still go ahead and find the most affordable to go to the for the use of the grant. Affordable and reasonable. Internal controls, also a requirement for federal grants. When it comes to making sure you have internal controls, you should have an accurate listing of all the duties and procedures that each one of your financial officers or workers is responsible for. You need to have segregations of duty and secured record system. A good example would be is your case manager that's finding and inspecting the unit shouldn't be the same person that is writing the check for reimbursement. And then also sending us the RFC, because who will be checking to make sure this information is true, accurate, there's no conflict of interest. So you have someone separate doing those duties. And a good accounting software system, preferably something digital and electronic. We don't have a recommendation on a software. We want you to have something that's easy to track and maintain. Internal controls expenditure requests is designated to minimize misuse of funds, poor record keeping, and maximize the likelihood of identifying misuse or problems. Procedures of expenditure requests include the inputting of documents to compare to the budget and request reimbursement, as usually done by the case managers. The match of procurement to correct approved or match invoice to the request. Before you are sending that over to us, please make sure you're lining up things to make sure they're all matching. Your receipt match, which you're requesting for. Record and report any issues or concerns. Record and report any issues or concerns. Sometimes you don't see it now, and you all have been really good with that. If you see something that was charged incorrectly later on, let us know, and we'll do what we can to fix that. Multiple people should review every section of the process so that no one person can defraud the agency. Audits, 2 CFR 200. I mentioned this yesterday. The new cap is $1 million. So the regulation says a non-federal entity that expends $1 million or more during the fiscal year of federal funds must have a single or program-specific audit conducted for that year and according to the federal regulations. And this is as of October 1st, 2024. All right, so that was a quick overview of what the federal government requires of us when we're dealing with budgeting and also dealing with federal funds. The next set of slides, I'm going to go through creating and maintaining a budget. I'm going to go through different types of budgets and how you can use those. Now, as I go through this, you won't find this inside a policy. This is just going to be a recommendation to help with your budgeting of your programs. I like to think that there are two types of budgets: reflective budgeting and forecast budgeting. As I mentioned, you won't find this language inside a book. This is just how I see budgets working best for us. Reflective and forecast budgeting. In reflective budgeting, it can only be used by agencies that have received funding for the same grant activities or received funding for similar activities the year before. By its name, reflective budgeting looks at your budget you have the previous years. Reflective budgeting provides a more stable budget prediction than forecasting budget methods. It is easy to determine a reasonable budget based on expenses that you had before. This method does not consider any increases in costs during the year. Forecasting budget, it can be conducted by returning a new grant subrecipients. So forecasting can be done by returning a new grant subrecipients. It can account for any changes in the cost of housing units and overhead, and it requires more calculations. So it has some positive. As I mentioned, the good is it can be conducted by new agencies or returning agencies, and it accounts for changes in the housing and utility market and overhead costs, but it does require a lot more calculation. Also, it may not provide an accurate picture of the housing market in the area. Budgeting steps. Let's look at how we should create our budget. Creating your budget. First, set your grant limits. Yes, you can do that, okay? And we will go through that in the next couple of slides. Next, get your case managers and housing providers involved in your budget. And third, reevaluate frequently for changes and discuss potential changes with Mississippi Home Corporation and case managers. You need to if you haven't been doing that, get your case managers involved in the budgeting process, especially as it get into the application of the budget, because it makes a big difference if they're involved or not. Let's look at our steps. Step 1, identify your most consistent budget line item. We have some budgets or some line items that's going to be consistent throughout the entire year. Examples are staffing, shelter operations, and HMIS. Also, identify caps that might apply to that budget line item. For example, for staffing, ESG have a 50% cap for staff. For shelter, HUD has a 60% cap for the state's staff on outreach programs. HMIS is capped at how much they bill you for based on your COC. And Hopper has an admin cap of 7%. However, staff in Hopper can be charged directly to the program activity. So after you identify your consistent costs that probably won't change through the year, also identify all your split costs. Staff and other resources not fully dedicated to a grant, and a grant component should not be charged fully to a grant or one of its components. For example, staff time and resources can be split by tracking staff time and resources directly to the program that it's working with, using a reasonable percent in proportion to the actual resources dedicated to the grant. So there are two ways you can split it up, but make sure it's documented appropriately. If you have multiple grants, you cannot decide due to lack of funds in one area to move staff around. A good example, if you have ESG, choice, and Hawkwa, and because you ran out of Hawkwa early, you decide to move 100% of your staff time to Hawkwa. You cannot do that. That's against the federal regulation unless they're only serving Hawkwa applicants. It has to make sense. If they're serving Hopper and ESG, they need the timesheets need to align with that. Another good example is if you're working with street outreach, that's the only line item you have left. You have about 15,000 in street outreach. You have no funds nowhere else, and all of a sudden, I see your RSC and your director is doing street outreach. It's not impossible, but it will raise a red flag to, are they just moving salaries from one component to another, or are they actually doing those activities for the program component they're charging to? So make sure when we split, we do it appropriately. Splitting. If you're doing forecasting budgeting, use step 1 and step 2 with the match to determine your staff, shelter, operation, HMIS costs. So step 1 and step 2, step 1 would have been determining the consistent costs, and step 2 would have been also identifying the caps. So once you determine that for forecasting, your budget for that area should be good. For reflective budgeting, use your last end of year budget to determine the expected cost for staffing, shelter, operations, and HMIS. You can also determine a reasonable percent in proportion to the actual resources provided through ESG to determine the cost and cost to be charged to the relative grant. Use match to help with ESG budgets. As you can see inside step 1 and step 2, I did not mention Hopper because Hopper charges staff and admin differently than ESG. In step 3 for reflective budgeting, determine the grant's rental assistance and financial assistance budget. After determining your constant costs, you can use your budget balance for rapid housing and homeless prevention financial assistance, or for hopeful housing activities like TIFRA, PHP, and Sturmium. For reflective budgeting, use your last end of year budget to determine the expected cost for rapid housing, homeless prevention, or for hopeful housing. Determine the cost per unit service, and use this information to calculate your housing goals and budget for the new year. Adding rental arrears caps and rental payment requirements to your policy may help you with your budgeting and also meet your budgeting goals. So let's look at an example. A reflective budgeting example. Per ABC Housing Program Year 2023 CAPER, they received $80,000 for rental and housing services for their rapid housing, rental, and housing only. And they served 10 households during that year. During the 2024 application, ABC was awarded $50,000 for housing and rental services. So let's determine how much people can be served based on their new award amount. So determine the cost per unit of services for program year 2023. If we got $80,000 divided by 10, last year we spent $8,000 per household. So now we know that the cost per household. So taking our new amounts, 50,000 divided by the 8,000 we had per unit cost for last year, we expect to serve about 6 individuals, totaling about 50,000. Now this is it's not going to be exactly 6 households, but I had to do a whole number there. If you use your current rental price to determine ESG and HOPO rental assistance for financial assistance budget, you probably will have a more direct price to go over. So looking at the forecasting budget for your current prices, let's use the current year FMR and utility allowance for the service area. If multiple counties are being served outside of the metro, then use the average. Utility allowance can be used to determine the expected utility costs. Using the ESG HOPO funding amounts, determine the total number of households that can be served. So let's see how that will look. Per ABC Housing Program Year 2023 CAPA, they received 80,000 for housing rental services for 10 households with housing rental assistance for 2023. During 2024 application, ABC was awarded 50,000 for housing and rental services in the Jackson metro area. ABC Housing total grant for housing support services and shelters, 100,000, but we are just going to look at the housing and rental, okay? Determine the cost per unit of services based on the FMR utility allowance. In that area, utility allowance was $90 a month. We're going to project that everybody's going to get 12 months of assistance because it's a round number and it's the time of our contract. So 1 year, 12 times 90 for one household, they could get up to $1,080 in utility assistance based on utility allowance. The FMR for that area at average is $997 a month. 1 year of assistance per household will be about $11,964. Deduct utility allowance from your total household for FMR because for FMR that was already included. So I'm actually looking at my annual rent per household at $10,884. Based on that and the number and the amount of funds that was awarded, I expect to serve 4.6 households, which could be about 5 households for 12 months. It's actually not far from what I projected based on our last year grant. If possible, agencies should not max their rent amount at the FMR. Instead of the FMR, consider the average rent cost of properties you have a relationship with and what is the reasonable cost of rent the client can afford. Always promote self-sufficiency and self-sustainability. So we're not gonna push people to go to $1,000 unit if they have zero income. We can determine that most of our rents may be anywhere between $600 to $700, depending on the area. Now, if you live in an area that is high rents, like on the coast, we do expect that to be higher. Let's continue. Forecasting budgeting with internal rent limits. As I mentioned, as an agency, you can set internal rent limits to help manage your budget. The state's ESG and HOPO rent limits are capped at FMR and the utility allowance. ESG subrecipients may choose to reduce the rent limit in their community to be less than the FMR. However, subrecipients cannot increase the rent limits to go above FMR. New rent limits must be described in your program policy. With HOPWA, the rent caps is what we set at the state level, and that's going to be the FMR. If we choose to set a lower rent cap at the state level, we will let the HOPWA agencies know. But HOPWA agencies cannot set a separate cap outside of the state's policy. Forecasting with internal rent limits. So let's go for the example. ABC Housing conducted a market study on rents in their area through their most frequently used landlords or their landlord list. Based on the study, the highest rent identified in the study area is $850 for one bedroom unit. Based on their past service, their average household was one individual. The case manager at ABC Housing confirmed that the rent reasonableness in the area is usually between $700 and $850. ABC Housing used $850 as their rent limitation cap for the area to be applied to their 2024 grant. 12 months of assistance is equal to about one person going to get about 10,200. If they receive 50,000 for rental housing assistance, divide that by how much it will cost for one person, they expect to serve 5 households in the next 12 months. Now, this is just for the projection of the grant. We know that most people don't get 12 months of assistance, but some people do. Step 4, look at your monthly or quarterly budget. I said monthly or quarterly, depending on how your agency is, you might decide to go over your budget quarterly. As a case manager, though, I strongly recommend you review your budget monthly. So the financial staff must work with case managers to determine program budgets and to verify that goals are being met. Provide the case manager with a rental and utility financial cap. You provide them with that cap at the beginning of the program. Use the set cap to determine how much clients can be served during the budgeted grant period. So case managers must track the expenses of services provided and expected and review rental expenses with their rent budget monthly. This is not a requirement, but it's strongly recommended so you can make sure you're not overspending or underspending. Let the budget inform how much new clients that you can accept into the program. I know y'all tend to do this. I see it now in our home ARP program. Do not take a bunch of people at the beginning of the program year because you're not sure if you will have enough funds to maintain them throughout the entire contract period, okay? Case managers must inform the coordinated entry system of the number of referrals that can be accepted during the month. Case managers should not serve more applicants than their budget allows. And yes, it is okay to say no. We don't have space in our budget to take on new applicants at this time. Case managers must work to move clients as quickly as possible into permanent housing and stability, because that's where new people can come on in. As clients are discharged into housing stability, additional clients can move into the program, and the budget can allow and adjust the budget accordingly. It is recommended that case manager team maintain a rental assistance budget tracking sheet and conduct case conferences to determine clients' eligibility for discharge and enrollment of new applicants. The T-Hopper program requires a tracker. It is the easiest and most efficient way for all programs to track how much funds they have in rental assistance. Now let's work through the budget. This is the budget that you received during your ESG application. I'm gonna try to maybe do it this way. Second. All right, I'm gonna look. I'm moving on because I would like it. All right, so this is the ABC Housing Agency budget. I split it up into two different budgets so you can see how I work through the process. First, we're gonna go through. Okay, as I mentioned inside on my slides, the first thing we want to do is identify consistent costs. The consistent costs are usually going to be shelter. You know, if you're paying rent on your shelter, if you're paying insurance, if you're paying utilities, usually these things are consistent. There might be some variation, but it's usually consistent. And also considering our 60/40 cap, the ABC agency decided to use 50,000 in their consistent budget. Let's go through their breakdown. Their consistent budget, they already know that they know at the end of the year, they anticipate about $3,000 a quarter for their shelter utilities. And it might be more for your shelter or less, wherever your consistent cost is, which is about $12,000 a year. The shelter also anticipate that they know that their insurance comes at the end of the year about $5,000. And then they decided to put a little bit of money. They didn't have that much, so they only put about $1,000 in job training, and they put some time in here for a night shelter manager that works part-time. Also, based on what they know is consistent, they know that their staff time will be consistent, and also they help that time split. They also put out in their housing case manager salary, making sure they stay below the 50% is consistent. They know how much they would charge. So on their staff salary and also on the street outreach, how much they would charge based on how much time they would spend. So that's consistent. That's the easiest part of my budget. I know that those things won't change. And that equals out to 50,000, which is 50% of their grant. After I got my consistent things in, I know I have to pay each month my staff, my overhead, my insurance. Then I go in and determine the things I have to calculate. So let's go in and open up our second budget. All right, so move to 100,000. Let's look into it. On the shelter, that was consistent. So I didn't change anything on the shelter. That was consistent. For my cost, I could have predicted that out. Street outreach, that was consistent because that was only salaries. But here it goes with the Rappery house, and that's where the things changed. If you remember in our slides, we knew that based on utility, I'm using utility allowance to determine how much it will cost. 1,080 is a cost. It's how much we have for 4 individuals coming through the program for the year. I divide that by the 4 quarters, and I give them $1,080 going into a total of 4,320. And the same thing about the rent. Based on my prediction of the market study I did, I anticipate by serving 4 people, I can do $10,884 each quarter for a total of $45,680. Please keep in mind, this is just a prediction based on the rent calculations I did and the caps I give myself. I know I will only serve 4 households. When I go into, once I put that in there, then I can also go in and put in my outcomes. For Rappery housing, I said 4 people because that's all we anticipated based on our budget. Only 4 households it's going to be served. Now in street outreach, you can put how much you average seeing. Last year I saw average of 3 households each quarter, so you can put that in there and that'll be counted. In my emergency shelter, I have a max of 8 beds. So you're calling your beds here. I know sometimes my beds don't be full. Sometimes they are, so I just split it up based on that half of the quarter, so 100% full. Next half, I have like 1 empty bed. So put that there, and that's who we are counting. Your beds of service, your total beds of service, unless you have a bed that's dedicated 100% to a veteran and it doesn't touch ESG, we're counting your beds that you have. Even if you only pay $1 on that bed, we're counting that bed. But for rapid rehousing, it's going to be units of service for the clients we anticipate to serve and street outreach based on how much you expect to engage. Based on this, I anticipate serving 46 households with my $100,000. That's what you submit to us. Now, let's see how practical that is, okay? The shelter beds, that's going to be consistent based on your beds. When you do your caper, it might be more than that based on your bed rollover, coming in and coming out. I expect that is fine. But most times, what you predict is much less than what you actually do. So let's look at it. Once we get our prediction in, let's look at how we can maintain our budget. The best way to maintain your budget is going to be a rental and utility assistance tracker, which give it to your case manager, and they're going to go through and make sure this is updated monthly, and they are in communication with you regarding the spending. As I mentioned, you need to give your case managers caps. In our scenario, the cap the case managers had was, I think, 50,000, the rent plus utilities. So let's see how we'll look. And if you don't have your glasses on, you might want to put it on for this because it's going to be extremely small. I'm going to make it as big as I can. Okay. As I mentioned, if you work Hopwell, you're familiar with this. Okay. So this is ABC House. This is ABC Housing Agency. The case manager was given a cap of 50,000. The good thing is because you gave your case manager a cap, it won't affect your shelter. It won't affect your ability to pay your staff. They have their own cap. You're separating that out, okay? But it impacts how much people they can serve. In the tracker, we identify who the person is. We have the lease dates. We have the rent amount based on the lease. And then we have our cap. As I mentioned in our example, in ESG, you can set your own caps based on your community needs, or you can just work with the FMR. So this one, we use the FMR cap. And then look here, y'all don't do this often, but it is allowable. Client portion. This agency decide based on their limited of funds to require the clients that have income pay a portion towards their rent. And now we start tracking. Let's go to our first client. This first client here, looking for assistance, they have $1,800 of arrears, and you can set a cap on your rental arrears too. If you only want to do 2 months of rental arrears or $1,000 of rental arrears, you can set those cap and allow the client to find other resources to match what you're able to do. But this client has $1,800 rental arrears. This is a homeless prevention client, and their rent is $625 based on their lease. To prevent them from becoming homeless, we went ahead and paid their rental arrears, and we started paying their rent and their utilities based on the utilities that they provided to us. This agency, ABC agency, accepted this person in January, took care of their arrears, and continued to assist them. And in January, they also accepted 1, 2, 3, for a total of 5 households. And they were only able to do that based on their prediction. Okay, so let's work it through. If I was only accepting this first household, ABC agency, they accept that first household, they're working through it, they have all their 50,000, they have 47,920 left. So they know that their budget can hold more. And each month they work as a team to see, okay, we can how much more we can take on, or how much more we need to release. Towards the end, you will see this is the last one they added in. They're coming down to the close of their grant. They probably get, let me take this out. They have a balance now here at they spent they spent 47,000. They don't have much of a balance, so they know the next person they take in can't get much assistance. So they took in this family here. They provide rent for $700. They can't pay utilities. And then in December, they only had 608 left in their grant. And that's all they were able to provide the client. Whilst the case manager is working with other resources to help with the balance, or also working with the client to pay a portion or either or continue on to the program for a next year. The case manager is able to provide this to their accounting staff every quarter or every month to make sure that they're still online with meeting those goals. And because they were so good with getting people to pay a portion of their rent and meeting rental caps, they were able to serve 9 households versus the 4 that they predicted in their grant application. All right, y'all, that was a lot of information. We don't have much time, but I do want to take questions. Any question on this method of predicting and maintaining a budget? I do want to make sure I highlight the point that if your program do not have enough funds to take on new clients, let's make sure you communicate that with your coordinating team, also with us, so we can know what's happening. But if you're telling me you have no more funds to take on new clients, and I see you only spending no funds, period, then that's going to lead to another question, okay? So we see your RCs coming, we see which clients you have there. But if I don't see no clients to match up, you're denying someone, then we haven't received your request of cash in time, and they need to be coming on in. Any questions? Fred, any questions in the chat?
No, I don't have any in the chat.
This form is not available on our website, but I could put it on our website if you would like your case managers to use this as they track. If you're interested in setting community caps for ESG for your rent amounts, feel free to do so. If you want more information on how to do so, let us know, but it must be in your policies. You can't set a cap and don't put it in your policy because that's going to be a finding. It has to be in your policies. You're going to implement some type of internal caps or limits on rental arrears, so how much rent you will pay. All right, I hope this helped you all. I hope I can see agencies, be true to their budget as much as they can. And feel free, as I mentioned, to reach out to us if you just want to have a one-on-one conversation about some of your concerns with budgeting. This tool will be placed on our website under forms if you need to use it. Thank you all and have a blessed day.